Hello, friends. My name is John Kok, and today I have the distinct privilege of bringing to you a very special holiday edition of News from the Law Shanty. Here at Warner, as you might expect, we've received many letters and emails about the pandemic and the proper legal responses. Now, very few of these letters have actually threatened any physical harm against any of us, and for that, we are very appreciative. So today, as a special treat to you all, we brought in St. Nicholas himself to answer your most pressing COVID employment questions. So then, without further ado, I give you Santa Claus, or as he's known in his native Sicily, Babbo Natale. Babbo.
Ho, 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 Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. It's wonderful to be here in this magnificent shanty. Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here with you. So let's get right to the letter.
The pleasure is all mine, Santa. Let's get to the letters. I have one here. Our first letter today is from Shelley from Sheboygan. And Shelley writes, Santa, all I want for Christmas is some fudging clarity. The Michigan law says employees who have been in close contact with someone who has COVID must quarantine for 14 days. The CDC now says something entirely different. What is the CDC saying, and who do we follow?
Well, so under the new guidance, we've gotten from the CDC, we've gotten two changes, as you all may know, to the important definitions. The first is the definition of close contact. And a while back, the CDC changed that definition from 15 minutes to 15 minutes or more within 6 feet over a 24-hour period. So that makes that definition of 15 minutes a little broader than it used to be. The CDC is now also saying close contact occurs if you provided home care to somebody who's sick with COVID, if you've had direct physical contact with somebody who has COVID, like hug them or kiss them, and with the mistletoe going on this time of year, that might be happening, so be careful. If you're sharing eating or drinking utensils with somebody who has COVID, which is really silly, don't do that. And if somebody sneezed or coughed on you, which apart from being gross, can also cause you to get COVID. As you probably know, historically, throughout the course of this pandemic, the CDC is saying 14 days of quarantine from your last exposure to the positive person who has to isolate. That still remains the recommended period. The CDC is kind of calling it the gold standard, but they are allowing two different options now for people who have been in close contact, but who are asymptomatic. And those people can end their quarantine if, after day 10, if they didn't take a test and they're asymptomatic, or after day 7, if they did get a negative test, provided that the test is not administered more than 48 hours before the end of the 7-day period. So that allows you to end that quarantine a little earlier. You still have to watch for symptoms for the full 14 days. And if you develop symptoms, it's right back out of work. Now, remember, that's CDC guidance. But in Michigan, we've got this law. We've got Public Act 2020-238, which has a different definition of close contact. It's got the old CDC definition of close contact, which is 6 feet for approximately 15 minutes or longer. That 15 minutes is over the full 24-hour period, according to some FAQ from MIOSHA. But that statute also says employees who have had close contact with an individual who tests positive or who display the principal symptoms of COVID, and this is important, shall not report to work until one of the following conditions are met. One is the 14 days from last close contact. And the other is the person you were in close contact with got a medical determination that they didn't actually have COVID when you were in close contact with them, that they had a cold. There's some exceptions to this for healthcare workers and first responders, but again, that's a fixed list of exceptions. And to answer the specific question, which one do we follow? Well, right now we have to follow the Michigan law. That's law. That's not a guidance from the CDC. That's law. Now, we do know the legislature is aware of this problem, and hopefully they'll get a legislative fix, maybe an amendment or something like that. But for right now, we want you to follow that Michigan law. And don't forget that Michigan law has a personal right of action in it. So an individual employee can sue you under that statute and the minimum damage is $5,000.
Any chance the good little girls and boys in the legislature get this fixed before the end of the year?
I'm gonna not. I'm gonna hold my tongue. I'm gonna watch my tongue. I would say little chance. It's possible. They are in a lame duck session. There is still an opportunity to get it fixed. We know they are aware of the problem, and we know they are aware that it's a serious problem. So it's possible, but nah, I wouldn't hold my breath if I were you.
Okay. All right, Santa. We got another letter for you here. This letter is from Fred from Flushing. Fred writes, Santa, I want to be on the nice list. So if I do have a COVID positive employee in our workplace, I want to report it to the county health department right away, like MIOSHA's emergency rule requires. But who do I report it to? Would this be the county health department in the county where the employee received the positive test, where the employee lives, or where the employee works?
Well, fortunately on this question, and that's a really good question, one we've been getting quite a bit, unfortunately, because of the positive test, we have some actual guidance from MIOSHA on the rule, and they're pretty clear about it. If you go to the MIOSHA page on the state website, they've got some FAQs there, and they have an FAQ on this particular issue, and it says the following. Since the emergency rules apply to workplaces and the concern is with transmission in the workplace, the employer would report the positive to the local health department, city and county, where the employee worked during the time period they were infectious. And that's the 2 days before the positive test or the symptoms occurred. But it's the county and city where the employee worked. Most cities don't have health departments, or, if you're not in a big city. So it's the county really where the employee works that you have to report it to, that local health department.
Okay, thank you for that, guys. Let me just grab the next letter here.
Well, John, wait a minute here now. Before we go any further, I have a question for you. It's something that's really been bothering me.
Well, we'll shoot, Santa.
As you may have heard, my favorite little elves from UPS and FedEx are busy flying vaccines around the country right now to make sure that the good little girls and boys are safe. But John, what happens if employees or employers like me, I employ all those elves, want to require employees to take this vaccine, and some employees just won't do it? I've got some elves that are a real pain, and I'm anticipating some problems here. Help me out.
Yeah, I think some of our clients have some of those elves too, Santa. And that's a great question. We are hoping, of course, to get more guidance from the EEOC as we anticipate a lot of issues here. But as we learned in a previous episode of News from the Law Shanty, employees, including elves, likely can't just refuse to take the vaccine unless they can show that they have that legitimate disability that might be impacted by the vaccine, say if they have severe allergic reaction to some of its contents, or they have one of those sincerely held religious beliefs. If an employee or an elf cannot show these things, we're pretty confident, based on previous guidance we received, that you can force that employee to, or if they refuse, you can let that employee go. Now, what if the employee can actually demonstrate a legitimate disability or a sincerely held religious belief? What then? Well, that's where it gets really complicated, and we need more guidance. EEOC, if you're watching, which you are probably not, we need more guidance. But until we get it, I have a couple thoughts. The EEOC has said that the COVID-19 pandemic meets the direct threat standard. And this is important because the ADA says you can exclude individuals from the workplace who pose a direct threat to themselves or to others. So while this pandemic is ongoing, which might be months, could be longer, an employer who has an employee won't take the vaccine, that employee may very well be deemed a direct threat. So an employer could potentially exclude them from the workplace, perhaps putting them on unpaid leave, perhaps even terminating them or laying them off, although I doubt the EEOC is going to endorse employers terminating employees with disabilities or sincerely held religious beliefs. By the way, this concept of sincerely held religious belief, I expect, as I'm sure you all do, that employees are going to really try to push the limits of this and say, my sincerely held religious belief is I don't want to take a vaccine, and I sincerely believe that. Now, last time I checked, there are very few major religions that would have anything to say about this, but I do expect we'll get that from employees. So another thing we're going to want to be thinking about is if that happens, if we're going to require it, what kind of questions are we going to ask of employees about the sincerely held religious belief? And that's something maybe will be a future topic at the Law Shanty, but also something that you should talk to your attorney about how you're going to structure that. So, but beyond even requiring that they take it or that they're laid off, other accommodations employers could consider is that, if you're not going to take the vaccine, well, then you have to wear additional PPE. You've got to continue the mask and other requirements. You've got to have barriers. Perhaps you're going to continue to remote work when others do not. Or we could decide we're going to incentivize instead taking the vaccine, additional pay, extra day off, et cetera. And I know a lot of our clients are thinking about that. So long story short, right now, I wouldn't make any decisions or create any policies or programs about what we're going to do about this vaccine. We still have a ways off till we have access to it, but we should be thinking about it and thinking about what we're going to do when that vaccine becomes available.
Well, John, I'm not sure that really answered my question, but don't worry. I think you're on the nice boy list anyway. So don't be surprised if you don't see those footy pajamas in your stocking for Christmas. Hey, look at the time. Now, look, I got to get back to the North Pole and make sure my logistics team has everything in place for the next vaccine, the Moderna vaccine that's coming. I really had a great time here in the Law Shanty. That Palazzolo guy told me to tell you that we're going to take a couple of weeks off for the holidays because Santa's up there being pretty busy. But we will see you after the new year. Merry Christmas, everybody. Have happy holidays, and we'll see you next year. And thank you very much, John, for joining us.